Greetings from Oklahoma, the 46th state to join the Union, which it did on November 6, 1907. It has 3.5 million residents, ranking it 28th in population.
I think Oklahoma is a Southwest state.
It'd be a Midwest state, wouldn't it?
I've been raised with more of a Southern influence.
I don't care what you call it, West or Southwest. It is a place where a cowboy wants to be, and that's where I want to be.
Whatever you call it, Oklahoma has produced some genuine American originals. There's homespun humorist Will Rogers, Native American Olympian Jim Thorpe, and singer-songwriter Woody Guthrie, whose music helped define America's heartland. The shape of Oklahoma is easily identified by its distinctive panhandle. From 1850 to 1890, that strip of land remained unclaimed by any state, earning it the name No Man's Land.
And at one time was a site for some outlaws. It did not belong. Texas claimed it. It was later taken from Texas and given to Oklahoma.
Although it is considered part of the Great Plains, Oklahoma has a surprisingly diverse geographical terrain. Visitors to the state can experience everything from deserts and high plains to forests to swamps and mountains. Oklahoma also has more man-made lakes than any other state. But underground is where you'll find the state's most famous commodity.
The oil industry boomed incredibly for the first 3 decades of the 20th century.
Oil is such big business in Oklahoma that there's even an oil well drilled beneath the state capitol. In recent years, natural gas production has surged, and Oklahoma is now the 3rd largest producer in the nation behind Louisiana and Texas. But Oklahoma has had its share of firsts. It was home to the first parking meter and the first yield sign. It claims the first shopping cart and the first aerosol can. It's the only state to have a Broadway show tune as its anthem. But it was the last state to legalize tattooing, which it did in 2006. Oklahoma today has the nation's 2nd largest Native American population, more than 398,000. Those numbers reflect the bitter history of the government's Indian relocation policies. In 1830, the area that is today Oklahoma was designated for resettlement by the Indian Removal Act.
Not asked to leave, they were forced to leave. When we started migrating to Oklahoma, that was the Trail of Tears. And along the way, a lot of our ancestors passed away.
Many different tribes, mostly from the east, were settled here. Hoping to control their own destiny, they joined forces in an attempt to make Oklahoma an Indian state.
Before Oklahoma became a state, there was a movement by the Indian tribes to make it the state of Sequoia. Even though Sequoia was not successful becoming a state, eventually when the state of Oklahoma did become a state, it has an Indian name, and it comes from the Choctaw language, means home of the red man.
There are a total of 39 tribal governments throughout Oklahoma, more than any other state. For the most part, Oklahoma's Native Americans do not live on reservations. Within our larger society, they strive to maintain their distinct cultural identity, which has been a struggle since the first incursions of white settlers.
Much of the frontier of the American West had been settled, but there was this area that had not been assigned and thus became known as the unassigned lands. And there was a great deal of pressure to open those unassigned lands to non-Indian settlement.
Thousands of settlers were poised to swoop in once the restricted territory was made available for homesteading. On March 23, 1889, President Benjamin Harrison signed legislation opening up the unassigned lands. The stage was set for the first of Oklahoma's 5 land runs.
People have been given the opportunity to simply ride off into the sunset and stake for themselves a new home in a new land.
At the different borders of this area, the Army was there to control the crowds, and at the appointed time, they fired cannons and pistols and rifles. And this mass of humanity, approximately 50,000 people, rode horses, some had wagons to stake their claims.
Oklahoma City was literally born overnight when 10,000 of those settlers staked their claims in that area. Never before in the history of the West had so many people been concentrated in one place in so short a time. The land rush even gave the state its nickname, Sooner. Back then, however, it wasn't exactly a compliment.
It is the name of a group of people who simply slipped beyond the borders during the land run periods. So they were called Sooners because they got there before they were supposed to. They didn't wait until opening day. Sooners are not cheaters, they're just ahead of the game.
Less than 50 years after that first great land rush, a prolonged drought turned the state's rich farm belt into a wasteland. Oklahoma had become part of the Dust Bowl.
Dust was everywhere, of course, and you just was continually fighting it. You finally got so used to it, you just lived with it.
In some ways, the Dust Bowl can be traced to the Wilson administration after World War I, when he wanted this area to be the breadbasket of the world. So they began to plow up all of the short-stem grasses that had held the soil together, to plant wheat. But in 1932, when the droughts began, nothing would hold the wheat. That left the dust just on the surface. And once the winds blew, it blew the dust away, and all the topsoil disappeared.
My mother just cleaned and cleaned, and even when you went to bed at night, the sheets were just gritty.
The agricultural devastation that resulted lengthened the depression for already hard-hit Oklahoma farmers. Roughly 15% of the state fled to California. After 8 years, the droughts relented. Under the administration of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the Soil Conservation Service was founded, which encouraged improved farming practices. The resilient Oklahoma farmers who outlasted those hard times saw their land reborn.
This character of ability to rebound from adversity, and having done it over and over again, even carries up really to modern times with the bombing of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City.
The bombing on April 19, 1995, killed 168 people. Until the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center, it ranked as the deadliest act of terrorism on U.S. soil.
We've rebuilt a city that was torn apart by terrorism. Lost 14 buildings in this downtown area. All have been rebuilt and brought back. I think you see a city that's been revived because we decided we would not let this act of terrorism divide us.
Look here, I'm talking about America, sweet America.